Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Amanda Vinicki.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman has the evening off on this very stormy night.
We knew it would be a consequential call because it was one of 5 states that really mattered, right? Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona.
Conspiring to undermine an election, we speak to the lead counsel of a group trying to hold fraudulent electors in Wisconsin accountable.
Some people say, this is going to affect my vote. Too many people are dying needlessly.
Following weeks of calls for action, a bipartisan group of senators announced an agreement on gun control. We have local reaction.
It is evident that our streets are not safe.
Cyclist and pedestrian safety advocates rally for change after 2 toddlers are killed by drivers on Chicago streets.
Summertime means swimming in the lake for many Chicagoans, and a new law aims to make that safer.
The Mag Mile sees its biggest retail lease in more than 5 years. That and more business headlines from Cranes.
We go under the sea at the Field Museum to meet aquatic creatures from the time of the dinosaurs.
No, you're not going to say that. And I'm not going to let you get away with that. No, I'm not.
Well,
not with my family sitting there, because that is an absolute shameful thing to say.
And we remember Jim Ryan, the former Illinois Attorney General and gubernatorial candidate who died yesterday. But first, some of today's top stories. Tornado sirens have been sounding all over the city and much of the region in the last hour. The National Weather Service has issued a tornado warning effective until 7:15 this evening for the entire north and west portion of the city and much of the southwest portion as well. That warning extends out over O'Hare and western into the northwest and west suburbs like Elmhurst and Schaumburg. Warning means potential funnel clouds have been detected, and heavy rains, winds, and extensive lightning are being reported thus far. We hope everybody stays safe, and we'll have an update on that a little bit later in the show. 6 people were killed via gun violence and more than 30 were shot over the weekend in Chicago. Still today, Police Superintendent David Brown highlighted the fact that homicides are down 7% over this period last year. Brown also addresses concerns about this weekend's upcoming Pride Parade and Festival, given the 31 arrests over the weekend of members of a white nationalist group that allegedly planned to riot at a Pride event in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Brown says CPD is coordinating its intelligence and is on heightened alert.
We are going to be vigilant to ensure that this event, as well as others, go off safely. And we'll hold you accountable if you're planning, if you're doing anything to jeopardize the safety of others.
Early voting for the June 28th primary is now underway in all 50 Chicago wards. Each ward has exactly 1 early voting location, and it can be found on the Chicago Board of Elections website. The board says over 2,100 voters have filed early ballots, with 107,000 requesting vote-by-mail applications. And don't forget, you can check out our WTTW 2022 voter guide to hear from the candidates in their own words on why they want your vote. It's all at WTTW.com/voter-guide. The House Select Committee on January 6 held its second nationally televised hearing today. The committee featured testimony from high-level members of the Trump campaign and former U.S. Attorney General William Barr, all explaining that they knew Trump had lost the election, and they tried to explain that to him. But those advisors said Trump would only listen to some of the more radical voices alleging wild conspiracy theories about voter fraud.
President Trump rejected the advice of his campaign experts on election night, and instead followed the course recommended by an apparently inebriated Rudy Giuliani to just claim he won and insist that the vote counting stop, to falsely claim everything was fraudulent.
And one programming note, we'd expected to have a forum tonight with the candidates for the 6th congressional district, but both candidates informed us today that they needed to cancel their appearance. And up next, we look ahead to the future of the January 6th committee hearings and about fraudulent electors, so please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Today's January 6th hearing focused on Trump's false claims of a stolen election after several advisors, including the former Attorney General, told him those claims had no merit, and indeed he had lost. Part of the alleged overall scheme to overturn the election involved hopes that then Vice President Mike Pence would reject electors and have states appoint different slates. Just north of the border in Wisconsin, a group of Republicans played along, signing fraudulent documents falsely declaring themselves as Trump electors. Now a nonprofit law firm is suing to bring criminal charges against some of them. And joining us now with more is Jeff Mandel, lead counsel and president of Law Forward, a bipartisan nonprofit organization working towards preserving democratic principles in Wisconsin. Jeff Mandel, thanks for being here, and I want to get to your lawsuit, but first I want to ask you your reaction to the case the January 6th committee has made in their hearings thus far.
Well, I think what we're hearing is we're getting a larger picture, and we are seeing, especially in today's hearing, that President Trump was basically being told by more and more people that he lost, and he was just sidelining those people and listening to the smaller and smaller core of people who were willing to lie to him, who were willing to tell him he won. And it was that tiny group of people that we believe were conspiring and scheming to make sure that these fraudulent electors in states around the country, including Wisconsin, submitted false paperwork to Congress.
And Wisconsin is the state that your lawsuit is focusing on. All right, so this group of individuals, they meet in secret in the state capitol in Wisconsin on the day the actual electors are certified after Biden wins. They declare themselves Trump electors. Tell us about what their plans were.
Well, you've got it exactly right. After the votes are all counted, after we know who won each state, the way that the president in this country is really selected is the Electoral College meets. And it doesn't meet in Washington. It meets in the state capitol in each of the 50 states on the same day at noon local time. And so here in Madison, we had the electors for Joe Biden, who won the state of Wisconsin, who held a public, open meeting that had been noticed in advance, and they cast Wisconsin's votes for Joe Biden to be the next president of the United States. Simultaneously, secretly, skulking in the shadows, the 10 individuals who were supposed to be the electors if Trump had won, they met as well, and they filled out fake papers and sent those to Congress in hopes of trying to hijack Wisconsin's role in choosing the next president.
And you mentioned that the hearings are laying out this broader scheme leading up to January 6th. So is there any evidence that these individuals were working with the Trump campaign, as we've seen similar scenarios play out in other states like Arizona?
There absolutely is. So there have been these new emails showing coordination in Arizona and in Georgia. But we know from several months ago, there were memos published on the front page of the New York Times that show that Trump administration lawyers on the East Coast were in communications directly with Trump lawyers here in Wisconsin and were calling the shots and pulling the strings to make this happen. It's all part of one large scheme. And we're really looking forward to the rest of the hearings telling us more and uncovering more of exactly how this worked.
All right, so they filed these documents that were fraudulent. They sent them to the Senate. They sent them to the National Archives. So much of the law here seems to be uncharted waters. What exactly do you believe violated the law and made what they did criminal in your eyes?
Well, I think I would say two things. First of all, what they did is fundamentally unfair. No one who hears about this thinks this is okay. It's not okay to try to subvert elections and to try to undermine our democracy. But what they did is also so outrageous, so novel, so much a departure from our nearly 250-year history as a nation, that it's really difficult to find a law that specifically says what they did is wrong, because no one ever thought that people would act this way. So I think that conspiring across state lines to subvert democracy, I think that's wrong, and I think that can be answered civilly and criminally. What's novel about our case, and we're the first ones in the country, is that we're trying to bring civil charges to create accountability for these people. There has to date been no accountability at all for any of the false electors or any of those who helped plot this out. We're hoping we can start that. And I'm also hoping that the information that comes to light in our suit and through the January 6th committee convinces prosecutors at the state and local level, the state and federal level, to consider that these people did break criminal law as well.
And you first brought a case before the Wisconsin Election Commission. They dismissed it. There might have been politics involved there. What's the jurisdiction of this case, and what's the status of it right now?
Sure. So we initially sought accountability in 3 different ways. We asked the Milwaukee County District Attorney to investigate whether any criminal laws were broken. We asked the Wisconsin Elections Commission, which, as you note, is a partisan political body, to investigate whether the election code in Wisconsin was broken. And we asked the Wisconsin Office of Lawyer Regulation, which takes care of ethics for attorneys, to state that those fraudulent electors, or that fraudulent elector in Wisconsin who's an attorney, violated legal ethics. All of those are still really in process, and we are hopeful that those are all going to come to fruition. But what's novel about our suit is we have now brought together several individual plaintiffs and alleged that the fraudulent electors and those who assisted them violated civil law in Wisconsin. And we're trying to create accountability by having a court say that what they did was wrong and can never happen again, by barring these individuals from ever participating in the Electoral College in Wisconsin, and possibly by having them pay damages.
We only have about 15 seconds left, but as we know, Wisconsin Republicans have sort of carried out attempts to decertify the election even well after Biden took office. What's the status of what's happening up there?
Well, those attacks are ongoing. They are completely baseless, and there is no possibility of them actually prevailing. But unfortunately, Wisconsin is at the forefront of efforts to attack and destroy democracy in America, and we're going to continue to see that. That's why we created Law Forward, was to fight back and protect democracy in Wisconsin.
All right, interesting goings on just north of here, up in Wisconsin. And our thanks to Jeff Mandel. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And we're back with more Chicago Tonight in just a moment. But first, a look at some of our upcoming future candidate forums.
A series of mass shootings spurring demands for Congress to act. Now, senators from both sides of the table have reached a gun safety agreement. The bipartisan framework, with support from 10 Republicans, includes financial support for states to create or administer so-called red flag laws, new spending on mental health treatment and school security, also enhanced background checks for gun buyers under the age of 21. Joining us to discuss this new proposal are Rhonda Ezell. She's creator and co-founder of Chicago Guns Matter. Also, Phil Andrew, principal of PAX Group, also a former special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He has led a violence prevention organization and is a survivor of the 1988 Winnetka shooting at his family home following the Hubbard Woods school shooting. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Rhonda, I want to begin with you. This is a framework. We don't have the actual language yet, but the backers describe it as common sense. Do you see it that way?
No, I don't. That's just a terminology that they use when they're trying to impose more restrictive legislation. What I do believe is I do support them getting something for mental health and for hardening our schools. Anything outside of that is violating the rights of law-abiding Americans. When you're talking about raising the age limit to 21 and then extending background checks on these individuals, you're not doing that. You know, you got them fighting for this country at an early age, 18, 19, and 20, and they're handling the same firearms. But then when it's up to their personal safety, they're being judged. They're being red flags, so to speak. You know, they're not getting their due process. So I'm not agreeing with what they have in this package. I haven't read anything. I don't know the bill number. It's just a framework of something that they've come to agree on. And to me, it's just more feel-good measures, because at the end of the day, you cannot legislate away evil. Criminals are going to continue to commit heinous acts. They plan these things out in advance. And just like the crime we see right now and the previous mass shootings,
well, Rhonda,
there are laws on the books against murder in the first place, and yet these people still committed a crime.
We'll get back to that soon. I especially want to hone in some maybe on the age elements of things, but I, of course, want to bring you in, Phil. The president has described this as what would be the most significant legislation impacting guns in decades. Do you see this, if it were to pass, as that monumental?
Well, unfortunately, it is that monumental. We have been stymied in really passing things at the federal level that are designed not to restrict people's rights, but to keep dangerous weapons from getting into dangerous hands. And the incentives there for creating red flag laws in states, additional support for mental health services and school security, but coupling that with background checks that include juvenile records. So if someone has had a mental capacity issue as a juvenile, that can be taken into account before we give them a dangerous weapon. Unfortunately, it does fall short of restricting assault weapons or weapons of war from those that are under 21. And as has been pointed out, the last two shootings were conducted by folks who waited virtually to their birthday to buy AR-15s and then use them against schools.
So one of the major players in all of these debates, of course, is the National Rifle Association, which has said it's not going to take a position until the full text of the bill is available. Said that it's committed, though, to, quote, real solutions, and then went on to say that the NRA will continue to oppose any effort to insert gun control policies, initiatives that override constitutional due process protections, and efforts to deprive law-abiding citizens of their fundamental right to protect themselves and their loved ones into this or any other legislation. So, Rhonda, I want to get back to you. They seem to be walking a fine line. How does this take away a Second Amendment right that lots of constitutional scholars say is not absolute?
Those scholars are wrong. The Second Amendment is absolute. The Second Amendment isn't about what type of firearm you can have. The Second Amendment was clearly written and put in place to keep our government in check, to prevent government overreach, to prevent tyranny against the citizens.
So there's nothing, Rhonda, in your opinion, that you believe could be done that would not impact the Second Amendment that deals with guns, period?
Not as far as legislation is concerned, because, again, you're talking about background checks. We had the son of the President of the United States of America actually lied on that 4473 form for his background check when he bought a firearm, and nothing was done there. So what is the system doing? Is it working? Does it work for some or others?
Phil, I think you wanted to jump in there.
At the end of the day.
The truth is that they've been shown to work. They're incredibly effective in terms of vetting out who is already has a criminal record or a dangerous history. They obviously need to be enhanced. And that's why, 80% of gun owners agree with enhanced background checks. And you can see the grip of the gun lobby starting to fade due to financial mismanagement, fraud, collusion with a Russian spy, and their senior executives really imploding.
Phil,
their grip is starting to slip, even to the tune that we see Mitt Romney is willing to support this package, and he's one of the highest money getters from the gun lobby.
Phil, would this even make a difference, though, Phil, in the sense that the Uvalde shooter didn't have any sort of official background in terms of either mental health, criminal background check? Would anything have been found in this extra measure?
Absolutely. In fact, he did have contact as a juvenile for having made threats. And that's something that's going around the country. Even in our own community here, I know of several within the Chicago area just in the last 72 hours in which law enforcement was notified of somebody making a dangerous threat, and they were able to intervene and deny them access to firearms. So this is a very important tool. It's proven very effective in the states that have these. And it's time for us to start paying attention to the data instead of the greed of the gun lobby.
And Rhonda, we have about 30 seconds left. I hear you trying to jump in. Go ahead, last word.
Now, what I was going to say is we had the Obama administration that was not even putting people's information in the system to be checked. And they know that they did. We had Operation Fast and Furious. We just had President Biden leave billions of dollars worth of hardware over in Afghanistan, sent billions of dollars over to Ukraine, which their citizens are using those firearms. And yet they want to disarm America. It's not going to happen. We're not going to give up our firearms.
And that's all the time that we have. We will see if anything comes to fruition with this legislation. Congress set for recess later this month and still waiting for this framework to take form legislatively. By the way, also cracks down on straw purchases, one of the major issues in Chicago. So with that, our thanks to Rhonda Izell, also Phil Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
You bet.
And back with more Chicago Tonight right after this.
We've made it.
Justice Jackson's appointment to the Supreme Court provides a beacon of hope.
Black women are underrepresented. We still rise. We still show up for one another.
It's us investing in the next generation and giving them something to enrich the next generation with.
The Field Museum is diving deep to introduce visitors to underwater wildlife that lived 200 million years ago. Producer Mark Vitale recently gave us a preview of the exhibition Jurassic Oceans, Monsters of the Deep. Here's another look.
When dinosaurs ruled the land, creatures like the plesiosaur thrived in the sea. Through animation, models, and fossil specimens, the Field Museum sheds light on the fascinating and the fierce.
So this exhibition's all about what's happening under the seas during the time of the dinosaurs. So it's featuring the marine reptiles that ruled the oceans. Things like plesiosaurs, mosasaurs, ichthyosaurs, and the other creatures around.
The Loch Ness Monster of Scottish folklore was thought to be a surviving plesiosaur.
The plesiosaur is known for its really long neck. It's kind of a cool feature because it used it to sneak up on things. The small head could get close before the rest of the large body appeared to the prey.
The museum is the first U.S. stop for a show that came from across the sea.
All of the fossils are coming directly from the collections of the Natural History Museum in London, most of them from the UK, which is one of the best places in the world actually to find a lot of these marine reptile fossils. The exhibition includes some really amazing CGI animations that can help you see what these creatures looked like as they were swimming around, hunting, trying to avoid being hunted, but also many fossils, including fossils and replicas that visitors can touch.
Touchable items thankfully do not include coprolites, the fossilized poo on display.
We have the entire ecosystem represented, everything from the ferocious hunters, the apex predators, all the way down to the invertebrates and little fish that they're eating. So you may see things like the ichthyosaurs that look a little familiar because they look like they have the shape of dolphins, but they're actually not related at all. However, the kinds of features that benefited the ichthyosaurs also benefit the dolphins. The long snout, the ability to cut through the water.
Not every specimen hails from the Jurassic period. A shark tooth as big as your hand comes from the jaws of the megalodon, which was 3 times the size of a great white. But megalodon was not a Jurassic shark.
The exhibition includes some sharks as well. Ancient sharks like the megalodon that was the largest shark to ever live. It lived millions of years after the time of the marine reptiles, but it sort of inherited the seas later on. You can really dive in to see all the creatures of the past and imagine the world as it has been in the past. The Jurassic oceans were full of life at every level of the ecosystem.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
The Jurassic Oceans exhibition is now open at the Field Museum and runs through September 5th. You can see more Monsters of the Deep on our website. And now, Amanda, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Paris. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, a new fast food chain opens in Russia after McDonald's shuts its locations across the country. That and more from Cranes. After 2 toddlers and an elderly man are killed by drivers this month, advocates say drastic changes are needed to make city streets safe for all. Summertime means swimming in the lake for many Chicagoans, and a new law aims to make swimming safer. And remembering former Illinois Attorney General and gubernatorial candidate Jim Ryan, who died yesterday at 76. But first, some more of today's top stories. Late word this evening that the 17-year-old daughter of Congressman Sean Casten died today. The Casten family has requested privacy and has released no further information. Our condolences to Congressman Casten and to his family. We mentioned earlier in the show that Congressman Casten had been scheduled to join us this evening. As Paris mentioned earlier, a tornado warning was issued within the hour for parts of Cook and DuPage counties. A tornado watch is in effect until 11 p.m. for much of the area. That warning, I believe, through 7:45. Now, as for the next few days, it's about to get hot, 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 enough that a National Weather Service heat advisory will be in effect starting noon tomorrow through Wednesday night. The heat index could top 109. That means staying out of the sun and in air conditioning and checking in on those who can't, plus drinking lots of H2O. Don't leave kids or pets in cars. Recession fears rise as stocks tumble, the U.S. now in bear market territory as the S&P dropped 3.9%, a dip of more than 20% since January's high. The Dow and NASDAQ also down. Economists are watching for the Federal Reserve to make news on interest rates Wednesday. Elected leaders kicked off celebrations for Juneteenth, holding a ceremony to raise a Juneteenth flag at Daly Center.
Juneteenth, also known as Freedom Day, reminds us that our pursuit of racial equity, a future state where race is no longer a predictor of our outcomes, cannot be achieved without an honest reckoning of our past and a strategic pursuit of our future.
Juneteenth is Sunday. It's a state and federal holiday for the second year. Illinois is increasing access to a program that helps low-income families afford childcare. Starting next month, families with incomes below 225% of the federal poverty line will become eligible for state help, up from the previous limit of 200%.
And in order for me to be where I'm at now, I needed childcare. I went through a divorce. How can I provide it? I have to worry about who's going to watch my kids. It allowed me to go back to school. It allowed me to work longer hours. It allowed me to focus on my self-actualization because I didn't have to worry about my kids' safety.
Illinois will also pay daycare providers who participate in the state child care assistance program additional funding. Only 17 artists have achieved EGOT status. Chicago native Jennifer Hudson, now among them. Hudson just won a Tony for producing the year's best musical, A Strange Loop. Her awards shelf already has an Emmy, 2 Grammys, and an Oscar. A new fast food chain opens in Russia, and it might look and taste familiar. Meanwhile, back home, the Meg Mile gets a new and much-needed tenant. Plus, the old post office food hall is officially open. Here to go behind those headlines is Crain's Chicago business editor, Ann Dwyer. Thanks, Ann. Now, McDonald's shuttered its restaurants in Russia last month, but a new fast food chain has taken its place. Now, what's this called, and what do we know about it?
You're going to make me say it, aren't you, Amanda?
I'm not going there.
I'm going to just mangle this name, but the Russian name now is Vkushno and Tochka, which I am told translates to tasty and that's it. Now, there are plans to open 200 branches by the end of June, and then all of the restaurants nationwide, that's about 850 that McDonald's abandoned by the end of the summer. The new operator claims that all 62,000 employees will be retained at the new stores. A lot of the details of the sale are still really unknown to us. This Russian investor, Alexander Govor, has agreed to buy the entity. But for now, we know for sure that the McDonald's brand is officially exited from Russia, and a new brand is taking its place.
So, and we don't have much time. Do we know, do they have those really tasty, salty fries and super bubbly Coke?
They claim that they have a lot of the same recipes. Now, Coke, I can't guarantee, but everything else, yes.
Well, that's it for that story. Moving on to the Magnificent Mile, getting its biggest retail lease since 2015. Now, who is that new leasee? Where is it? And really, what does this mean for Chicago's really premier commercial district?
Well, it's one of the marquee spaces on the Mile, namely the old Gap flagship, which has been empty for a while now. The new tenant is a Canadian apparel brand called Aritzia, and it's agreed to take up the entire 46,000 square foot space there at 555 North Michigan Avenue, making it the biggest retail lease to be signed on the Mag Mile since 2015. And it is a much needed shot in the arm for that stretch of Michigan Avenue. It's really been on its heels since the pandemic with the exit of Macy's, Gap, Uniqlo, and other tenants. That stretch from north of the river up to Oak Street has been almost a quarter vacant. So this is welcome news for tenants and landlords in that neighborhood.
Spent a lot of time in that Gap shop in my day, so I guess I'll have to volunteer to go and check out the latest in fashion. Now, lastly, Ann, a food hall in the old post office has been in the works for some time. It's officially open now. What can hungry patrons expect?
Well, it's a whole panoply of options. They're looking to make this as kind of eclectic and wide-ranging as possible. You're going to find things like charcuterie, tacos, hot chicken, baked goods. At the center of it all, a new bar called Snorkel Box, which I learned today is post office slang for those blue mailboxes on corners near you. Yeah. Now, the developers behind this food hall are the same folks who brought you Thalia Hall in Pilsen. They're the folks behind the Loops Revival Food Hall and the Salt Shed at the old Morton Salt Warehouse. So they have a track record in town, and the hopes are high that this will draw traffic, not just from the post office, which is almost full, but also from people in the surrounding neighborhood.
So returning to the office and eating there too. You learn something new every day. Thanks for that education, Ann Dwyer.
Thank you.
And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
All right, thanks, Amanda. A 75-year-old man was struck and killed by a driver in North Center yesterday while crossing Irving Park Road. He's the 15th pedestrian killed in Chicago this year, according to city data and Streets blog. 4 bicyclists have also been killed. The man's death came just hours after a rally and march for cyclist and pedestrian safety, sparked by the deaths of 2-year-old Rafi Cardenas and 3-year-old Lily Shambrook, both killed by drivers this month.
Rafi and Lily, they were 2 sweet children, and they were killed because Chicago keeps failing the people who live and visit this city.
In Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg was at yesterday's rally, and he joined us now with more. Nick, what was that rally like yesterday?
Well, Paris, it started at the Lincoln Square intersection where 2-year-old Rafi was struck by a driver while crossing the street on a scooter. At last report, she had not been cited for the crash. Now, Rafi's parents actually spoke to the large crowd that gathered and said that everyone should feel comfortable on the streets of the place they call home.
This is where we should feel safe, where our children should be able to play, where we should be able to raise our families, where anyone should be able to take a stroll or a bike ride or ride their scooter without fearing the worst.
In times of trauma and grief, we ask ourselves so many questions. We search for answers in situations where there may not be any. In spite of that, we must seek out opportunities where we can enact change. We have to try.
After Rafi's family and other speakers addressed the crowd, the group marched about 1.5 miles to the intersection in Uptown where 3-year-old Lily Shambrook was killed last week. Lily was riding in the carrier of her mother's bike. A ComEd truck was illegally blocking the bike lane, forcing her mom to move into mixed traffic. A semi-truck pulled up alongside her, squeezing her between the 2 trucks and striking the bike. Lily was reportedly thrown from the bike and dragged by the truck.
Horrible tragedy, Nick. And so what kind of changes are advocates calling for right now?
Well, for starters, they want to see improvements to the city's network of bike lanes, calling them disjointed and inequitably distributed. That's work that the city says it's been doing. One other major focus is on getting protected bike lanes rather than just lanes painted on the roadway that don't offer any physical protection for cyclists. They're also calling for a shift in culture to get drivers to stop speeding and behaving aggressively, behave more carefully around cyclists and pedestrians. And they want to keep large trucks off of neighborhood streets like the one Lily was killed on, as well as put side guards on those trucks to prevent the kind of fatal crash that took Lily's life.
And Nick, there's long been this tension between cyclists, cycling advocates, and city leadership. But what's the mood been like in recent days?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's been a combination of things. You know, obviously speakers at yesterday's rally said this moment feels different to them, that there's some momentum to make real progress on improving roadway safety. But obviously it was a really emotional gathering as well because of the young lives lost. And there's plenty of anger there too. Now, advocates say police tend to take drivers at their word and blame the cyclists in the narratives around these kinds of crashes. They also say drivers illegally stopping or parking in bike lanes is a widespread and under-enforced problem in Chicago. According to city data, police and parking enforcement aides gave out about 4,500 citations for blocking a bike lane in 2019, about 2,700 in 2020, 3,600 or so in 2021, and nearly 700 as of earlier this year. But many cyclists say that just scratches the surface of what enforcement could be. The group Bike Lane Uprising's data of user-submitted obstructions received 21,535 complaints about blocked bike lanes during that same time period, compared with the 11,570 citations issued by the city. That database also has about 2,000 complaints about police and other municipal vehicles illegally blocking bike lanes. The group's founder says police are one of the worst offenders. The department did not respond to a request for comment about that or about that so-called victim blaming of cyclists.
And you mentioned calls for changing the culture on the roads. Nick, what does that look like in practice?
Well, part of that is infrastructure, narrowing lanes to force drivers to move more slowly, adding bump outs at intersections to make pedestrians safer. Cyclists also say, as we mentioned, driver aggression has gotten really bad. You know, sometimes in these stories, drivers respond in the comments sections or on Twitter, you know, when there's a bike crash or other issue, commenting about poor cyclist behavior that they see. But advocates say, listen, most people on bikes are behaving responsibly, and it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, given just how potentially deadly a piece of machinery a car is.
And especially deadly in the last month. Just horrible tragedies. All right, Nick, thanks very much.
Thank you, Paris.
And as Nick said, 15 pedestrians and 4 bikers have been killed in Chicago this year. Advocates are calling on the city to make changes so that the infrastructure to the streets is safer. And joining us to speak on what safer streets look like are Rebecca Resman, founder and one of the lead organizers for Chicago Family Biking, and Amy Reinell, executive director of the Active Transportation Alliance. Welcome both of you to Chicago tonight. I want to start off with that accident yesterday, or that incident that took the life of a 75-year-old man. Do either of you know the specifics of what happened there on Irving Park?
I can speak to roads like Irving Park. National data tells us that 97% of U.S. streets on which pedestrians are struck and killed have 3 or more lanes. The section of Irving Park where this man was killed was reconstructed last year, but instead of being designed for safety, it is still a 5-lane speedway. We've called for many ways to improve Irving Park, including bus rapid transit and safe pedestrian crossings, both of which slow vehicles, give people an alternative to driving. But here we are today discussing this tragedy.
And Rebecca Resman, we've had several tragedies this year, 15 bikers, 4 pedestrians killed so far. How does this compare to recent years?
You know, I can't speak to the data as well as Amy can, but I mean, I would say that it's comparable. It's not getting better, and we must do better. I also want to kind of mention that a lot of the big streets that Amy mentioned, where we see a lot of these traffic fatalities, are under the jurisdiction of the Illinois Department of Transportation, which we seem to struggle to meaningfully get to commit to complete streets projects that ensure that pedestrians and people biking are safe on their roads.
And Amy, right now you heard that statistic from Nick Blumberg that only about half of the citations are given to folks blocking bike lanes than complaints that are called in for those incidents. Why do you think that happens, and how come those citations are way down this year?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have all the answers on that, but I will say one of the reasons we are fighting so hard for concrete protected bike lanes is so that vehicles can't park in them, and so that people who are walking and biking aren't sharing space with many ton high-speed vehicles that can injure or kill you instantly. And so protecting those bike lanes in a way that's much more substantial than we've done to date. Most of our bike lanes are paint. Some of them have plastic bollards that are much more designed to not damage a car than to keep a person safe. We need to look at what we've built and make it so much safer. We can do high quality projects. We have a number of them in the city. The city knows how to do it. We just need to do it faster and better.
Rebecca Resman does that. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to just echo what Amy's saying. I agree completely. And if you want proof that, the bollards or the signs don't work, I mean, just look at the stop for pedestrian signs that the city puts in the streets at crosswalks that are uncontrolled. And generally, they are just destroyed. People driving are driving in a way where they're just hitting these signs till they're ineffective. And that just shows how we need concrete, we need more protection, and we need to slow drivers down and make them really pay attention to where they're operating their vehicles and how they're operating their vehicles.
Amy, right now I remember the former Mayor Rahm Emanuel talking a lot about how many miles of protected bike lanes the city had put in under his tenure. How amenable is the current administration to concrete protected bike lanes in more areas?
They've been ramping up building out the bike infrastructure. But if you look at the scale of our streets, 4,000 miles of streets, we have about 1% of those that's a protected bike lane. And most of that 1% is very poorly protected. We have so much to do. So when I say that our pace needs to speed up, it really dramatically, the pace and volume of building this infrastructure needs to grow exponentially. And there are other things we need to do to slow cars and trucks down and to lower the volume, especially on neighborhood streets where you were at that rally, Nick. It is not a street for trucks. And it's not a street for high speeds. And we can design streets in a way that slow those cars down. And we just haven't done enough of that.
Rebecca Resman, there's been some pushback to plans for more protected bike lanes. I was reading Alderman Kappelman in Uptown saying that, making those changes to Leland Avenue where that tragic incident happened isn't exactly on his radar. Why do you think there's pushback to this?
I think that there's a lot of people that prioritize parking and kind of their own agendas over these Safe Streets initiatives. And unfortunately, they get really loud and they get the ear of aldermen, and that's part of what our group's trying to do, is really encourage people that hear about these projects, that would be impacted by these projects, to make sure that they shout yes, we want these here. Because if they don't shout yes, they're saying no. And I unfortunately believe that a lot of aldermen and other people in power, I think that they just listen to a small but loud anti-bike and anti-progress group.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there. Our thanks to Rebecca Resman and Amy Rynell. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And up next, new laws aimed at increasing water safety. That's in a conversation that first aired on Chicago Tonight Latino Voices with guest host Marissa Parra of CBS 2 News. But first, we take a look at the weather.
A newly signed state law will soon require water rescue equipment along Lake Michigan in Illinois. That means things like life rings at piers, as well as warning signs in more dangerous areas. The law is the culmination of a years-long effort, one that came to a head after the drowning death of 19-year-old Miguel Cisneros, who you see right there near Pratt Pier in Rogers Park last summer. The Chicago Park District began putting up some life rings due to public pressure after his death. But once the law goes into effect next year, that equipment will be required anywhere people can enter the lake. And it took a lot of hands to make that happen. Joining us now with more, Miguel Cisneros' mother, Maria Diaz, water safety advocate, Hallie Quesada, and 49th Ward Alderwoman Maria Haddon, whose ward also includes nearly 2 miles of lakefront. Maria, I want to go to you first. You and I have spoken at length. Obviously, when it comes to your reaction, learning about the Lake Michigan Rescue Equipment Act, it's probably going to be twofold and nuanced given the fact that you had such a heavy loss in your family last year, but also seeing something come of it. How are you feeling right now?
Well, I must say that after the law passed, I felt good. And then when we found out that it had actually been put into use this week when a person was saved on North Avenue Beach, that made my day happier. I know Mikey's legacy is being carried on.
I can imagine that just knowing that he had a role in making this happen at least brings a little bit of peace. Hallie Quesada, we've been talking at length. You've been an advocate for life rings at beaches since 2018. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to really take on this fight? I know it was a traumatic moment for you.
Oh, it was awful. You know, we were on the beach when 2 13-year-olds were struggling in the water, and we were only able to save one. And that those moments when she had submerged and we were just frantically searching for anything that floated. We had 2 trained rescue divers on scene. Both of them had enough training to not go in without equipment, knowing what the currents were at that place. And it took 30 minutes for something that floats to get there after we called 911. So the urgency for this was really real, and we are grateful to finally see the life rings there.
Alderwoman Haddon, to you now. As the alderwoman of a lakefront ward, I'm curious what responsibility you think that the city and the state has in really having a role in preventing drowning incidents along the lake to begin with.
It's been in the last couple of years, myself and our state representative have used our legislative abilities and our roles as advocates, particularly as an older person, not having direct oversight or control over the park district as a separate agency. That role that's been most useful has been as very vocal advocate and supporter of community members. And then pushing for things like hearings, right, through our legislative body in order to add pressure. And so it's sometimes challenging to not be able to change the rules yourself or make people take the immediate actions that you know are right. But it's been a real honor to be able to advocate for residents in our community more broadly on this issue and to see us get this win.
Well, I know that it was definitely a long battle with the Chicago Park District. It's something we saw play out over the last few years. Maria Diaz, to you now. One, I know that earlier this week there was a water rescue using a life ring, so I'm curious what your reaction was to that. And then what do you think the city could be doing to increase water safety beyond what they've done so far?
Okay, so when I heard it this week, I was very happy. It was a bittersweet because I know nothing will bring Mikey back. And from what I heard last year, there were talks with the park district about installing life rings, and the idea just got pushed away kind of as not needed earlier in the summer. And if it had been installed, my son would be here. As far as what is needed, I mean, this is just a first step, but there's so many things that we could do to prevent drownings, which are something that is easy to do. I will start maybe with education even in our public schools, teaching kids how to survive or gain some extra time in the water, which I myself was not aware of. I'm 42, and as you know, flow, follow, as the 3 F's. But I think education is a must as well.
Okay. Hallie, to you now, because you're also a CPS teacher. I know that the city does offer water safety trainings, but do you think that water safety education belongs in city classrooms?
Absolutely. The key to drowning prevention really is layers of protection, and the life rings are an important step, right? That's like rescue equipment. Another layer is the education, that prevention piece. A lot of people have the misconception that water safety is common sense, and they're like, it's a lake, how bad could it be? There's so many hidden dangers. There's so many drowning survival strategies that we as a community just don't know. And the key to teach people is really a captive audience, because if you think you already know, you're not going to sign up. Captive audiences we find at schools, we find at camps, and we actually do have a sponsor in the House and the Senate for another bill that would add water safety education to an existing safety education law. So drowning actually takes more lives of school-aged children than tornadoes, fires, earthquakes, and active shooters combined. Yet we teach children how to protect themselves against all of those threats in school because of this safety law. So the bill we hope to get in next session would add water safety to that list.
Okay, I know this fight is far from over for you. This is something that almost feels like you've taken on as a second job. I'm curious, for those who are listening and are watching, what would be the #1 thing that you want people to learn when it comes to water safety training?
No matter what body of water you're in, being able to flip on your back and float will buy you time. It can help you control the panic, and we know panic kills. It can keep your head above water so you can breathe. So if you are looking to protect you and your family right now, top priority would be teaching and practicing that flip and float. Escaping your drowning emergency can happen later. You got to float first and control your panic.
Okay, and I know something else people have talked about is being able to spot riptides as well. All very important things. Alderwoman Haddon, to you now. The act also requires, the act we've been talking about, this new law, requires clear signage at high incident areas. Do you think signage is effective in keeping people out of those dangerous areas along the lake?
I think that it's effective at helping people to be able to better calculate their risks. Like Hallie said, and as we've seen too many times, both in the case of Miguel's tragedy, but also other residents, especially at that pier is a great example of a very high-risk area. You can go out there on a day, like a couple days ago I was out there, and it doesn't feel high risk. It doesn't look high risk. So the signage is so important because we make better decisions when we have more information. And that is, it's an easy thing that we can do, is tell people what the risks are as we work on this multi-layered approach to help them be safer and make better decisions.
I know that this was a multi-person effort, and all of you had a hand in making this happen. So thank you for joining us. Our thanks to Maria Diaz, Hallie Quesada, and Alderwoman Maria Haddon.
Thanks so much, Marisa.
Back with more Chicago Tonight right after this.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
Jim Ryan served as Illinois Attorney General for 8 years, starting in 1995. He twice ran unsuccessfully for Illinois governor. Ryan died Sunday after what his family said were several lengthy illnesses. Back during his 2002 campaign for governor, Ryan appeared in a WTTW forum with his opponent, Rod Blagojevich. When Blagojevich tried to tie Jim Ryan to a scandal in George Ryan's Secretary of State's office, Ryan gave this fiery defense.
And as every day passed, the corruption continued, and year after year, and year after year.
Are you talking about those Willis children?
And year
have
after
you
year.
no shame?
Is this public television or the Jerry Springer show?
Well, what is,
Can I finish?
No, you can't.
Yeah, can I finish?
You're not going to say that. And I'm not going to let you get away with that. No, I'm not.
Well,
not with my family sitting there, because that is an absolute shameful thing to say.
Didn't lift a finger to investigate the biggest scandal in Illinois history.
That was a federal probe from the beginning. Every United States attorney has said it.
Not
Every U.S. attorney has said it. And no matter what your media meisters tell you, I'm not going to let you get away with that, right?
I think it's failed leadership, Jim, and that's why Illinois is ready to change. I think Illinois is ready for change.
Try going to work, Rod. I did when I was sick. I went to work. Why don't you go to work? Why can't you pass one bill?
Mr. Ryan, Mr. Blagojevich,
for the record, brought up those children dying, and I'm not going to let him get away with that.
For the record,
The U.S. Attorney...
Not now, not never. Not for you and not for him.
The U.S. Attorney was on our program, sitting right there, and he said, Mr. Blagojevich, that what Mr. Ryan did in not pursuing investigation was completely the right thing to do.
That's Republican Jim Ryan back in 2002. Ryan took pride in what he called professionalizing the Illinois Attorney General's office and was once dubbed the most effective Attorney General in state history by a downstate newspaper. He also endured his share of personal tragedies, including the deaths of 2 of his 6 children, his own health battles, including beating cancer 3 times, as well as coming back from heart surgery. Jim Ryan died yesterday at age 76. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS Video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, safe, and dry. Good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a proud sponsor of diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused free continuing legal education for lawyers throughout the region.
Good grief, Nelly.
Antiques Roadshow, next on WTTW.
She was a pioneer of comedy.
I was never afraid. I had no cynicism.
Carol Burnett rose to stardom on her iconic TV show.
You better get out of here real quick, Sonny.
It's a nostalgic look behind the scenes.
She accepted every contribution from everybody.
Filled with hilarious clips.
The gown is gorgeous.
Thank you. I saw it in the window and I just couldn't resist it.
Carol Burnett, a celebration.
Tonight at 9 on WTTW.
The 2022 WTTW Great Treasure Hunt Sweepstakes is here. Enter for your chance to win your dream getaway. Relax on pristine white sand beaches with 4 nights of